Welcome, the anointed ones. Evil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes it wears a friendly smile and says, "I was just concerned about you." What happened to you wasn't just unfair, it was disturbing. They didn't just attack your reputation. They tried to assassinate your peace, rewrite your truth, and make the world believe their fiction. And the worst part, they did it while pretending to care. The kind of betrayal that hides behind concern isn't a misunderstanding, it's a performance. And you were the unwilling lead in their tragic little play. Here's the brutal truth. People aren't always jealous of what you have. Sometimes they're jealous of who you are when you have nothing. Your calm under pressure, your ability to stay grounded in chaos, your unwillingness to bite back. It drives their kind insane. They feed off reaction, and when you gave them peace instead of panic, they choked on their own poison. It's almost poetic. The very innocence they mocked became the proof of how twisted they truly are. Psychologists call this projection. Spiritually, it's self-exposure. Every accusation they hurled at you was a confession in disguise. When they said, "You're manipulative," they meant, "You see through my games." When they said, "You're fake," they meant, "You're real in ways I'll never be." And when they called you crazy, it was because sanity feels threatening to people who thrive on chaos. And now, the mask has fallen. The same people who once cheered the lies are now gagging on the truth. The same mouths that spread rumors now stutter when your name comes up. People are outraged, not just at what was done to you, but at how disgustingly easy it was for others to attack someone who never fought back. There's nothing noble about hurting an innocent soul. It's spiritual treason. But here's the twist. You didn't just survive the storm, you exposed it. Their cruelty became your credibility. Their schemes became your spotlight. And somewhere in heaven's archives, there's a note that says, "They thought they buried an innocent one, but all they did was plant proof of divine endurance." And let's be honest, watching them panic now that truth is trending, that's the only reality show worth tuning into. Number one, they didn't attack you. They attacked their own reflection. They didn't attack you because they didn't like you. They attacked you because deep down you reminded them of everything they couldn't face within themselves. Your presence reflected back the parts of them they had spent years hiding, denying, or destroying. You didn't say a word, yet your energy revealed what they didn't want the world to see. Their insecurities, their fakeness, their hypocrisy. It's a strange kind of truth. Some people don't hate you for doing wrong. They hate you for standing too right in a crooked world. When someone has built their identity on lies and pretenses, the sight of authenticity feels like an attack. It's not that you provoked them, your existence exposed them. You were the mirror they didn't ask for, and instead of cleaning up what they saw, they decided to shatter the reflection. It wasn't personal, though it felt personal. It was spiritual recoil, a soul allergic to truth. They saw in you a level of peace they couldn't fake, a level of integrity they couldn't copy, and a strength that didn't need to announce itself. That's what enraged them. You didn't play the game, you broke it without even trying. Their attacks weren't random, they were a cover-up. Every insult, every rumor, every attempt to twist your story was an act of self-preservation. They needed to convince themselves that you were the problem, because accepting your innocence meant admitting their guilt. That's too much truth for a weak conscience to hold. So they spun lies, rallied others, and tried to make you look like the villain, all because they couldn't bear to stand in front of the truth that you naturally carried. But here's the irony. In trying to destroy you, they revealed themselves. Their bitterness became obvious. Their envy started leaking through their smiles. People who once believed them started noticing the pattern, how every accusation somehow sounded like a confession. The more they fought your light, the darker they appeared. And without even fighting back, you won. Not because you outsmarted them, but because truth doesn't need defense. It only needs time. In the end, they weren't at war with you. They were at war with the reflection you forced them to see. You were just the mirror, and they couldn't stand the view. Number 2, you were targeted. Because you represented what they failed to become. You were never attacked because you were doing something wrong. You were attacked because you represented everything they failed to become. Your spirit reminded them of the version of themselves they abandoned. You carried the courage they lost, the heart they silenced, and the purity they buried under ego and excuses. It wasn't your success that bothered them. It was your essence. The quiet way you carried truth without needing to prove it. The strength that came from simply refusing to bend into corruption. You became a living contradiction to their mediocrity, and instead of being inspired, they chose to be offended. You didn't fit into the script they were used to. They expected weakness to come dressed in kindness, but your kindness came with boundaries. They thought being good meant being gullible, but you saw through manipulation without losing your compassion. You didn't play the victim or the villain. You simply refused to participate in their small games. That's what they couldn't handle. Your refusal to conform was louder than any argument you could have made. You didn't follow the unspoken rules of pretending, faking, and performing. You stayed real, and that made them feel fake. People who give up on themselves can't stand to see someone still holding on to purpose. It irritates their conscience. Your resilience became an accusation. Every time you got up after they tried to tear you down, it reminded them of how quickly they give up. Every time you stayed kind after being wronged, it exposed how bitter they've become. They couldn't understand how you could be so unshaken, how you could keep your soul clean in a world that rewards dirt. And because they couldn't figure it out, they tried to destroy it. But here's the twist. Their attacks became their own undoing. The more they tried to dim your light, the brighter your truth became. People started noticing the contrast. You stayed consistent while they kept contradicting themselves. They mistook your calmness for weakness, but it was discipline. They thought your silence was defeat, but it was wisdom. You didn't just survive their attempts. You revealed them for who they really were. They thought they were exposing your flaws, but all they did was highlight their own failures. You didn't just represent what they failed to become. You reminded them it's still possible, and that's what haunts them most. Number 3. They wanted a monster, so they fabricated one. They couldn't find anything wrong with you, so they made something up. That's how desperate they were to justify their hatred. They needed a story that would make them feel right about being cruel to someone who had done nothing wrong. It wasn't about truth. It was about control. They wanted to control how others saw you, how you saw yourself, and how the narrative unfolded. So when they couldn't dig up dirt, they started throwing dust, lies, rumors, twisted half-truths, anything to make you look like the villain in a story you didn't even know was being written. They needed a monster to point at, because it's easier to destroy someone when you've already convinced the world that they deserve it. That's the sick logic behind their actions. Create a false version of you, then attack it. They told lies with so much conviction that even some people who knew you started to question what they believed. And that's what made it so cruel. It wasn't just slander, it was psychological warfare. They wanted you to start doubting yourself, to internalize their projections, to ask, maybe I am the problem. That's how manipulation works. It twists the truth until the victim starts apologizing for things they didn't do. But here's where their plan fell apart. Lies need constant maintenance. Truth doesn't. They had to keep inventing new stories to sustain the first one, and eventually the cracks began to show. People started noticing inconsistencies. Their tone shifted from confidence to obsession. Their anger became too personal, too exaggerated to be believable. And in their attempt to destroy your image, they destroyed their own credibility. The longer they talked, the more obvious it became that the problem was never you. It was them. What they didn't understand is that character doesn't need defense. Time does the talking. The truth has a strange way of surviving the mess people make of it. Every lie they built against you became evidence of their own corruption. Every false accusation exposed their jealousy a little more. In the end, the monster they tried to create turned out to be their own reflection. They fabricated evil, but it ended up living in them, not you. Their lies didn't ruin your name. They revealed the rot behind theirs. Number 4. Real outrage is not just what they did, but how many watched silently. That's the part that cuts the deepest, not just the cruelty of what was done, but the quiet approval that surrounded it. People who knew better looked away. They saw your name dragged, your spirit crushed, your truth twisted, and they decided silence was safer than honesty. They didn't want to lose their comfort, their connections, their place in the crowd. So they stood by while you were torn apart, pretending not to notice. But silence is not neutrality. It's permission. And that permission is what allowed the injustice to grow unchecked. The people who watched it unfold had excuses ready. It's not my business. I don't want to get involved. Maybe it's not that serious. But deep down, they knew it was wrong. They just didn't have the courage to risk their peace for someone else's pain. And that's how evil survives, not through the strength of the wicked, but through the weakness of those who refuse to speak up. Every whispered conversation, every half smile, every look that avoided yours. It all added weight to the betrayal. It wasn't just what was done to you, it was what was allowed to happen around you. That's what makes the outrage now so heavy. People are finally realizing their silence had consequences. They're remembering the moments they could have spoken up but didn't. Some of them are even angry now, not just at your abusers, but at themselves. Because guilt has a long echo. It doesn't fade when truth comes out. It grows louder. They're haunted by the memory of their own inaction. And that's justice in its most poetic form. The quiet ones now carry the noise they tried to avoid. You were the mirror that reflected everyone's choices, not just the attackers, but the bystanders too. And now, as the truth unfolds, the world sees what kind of people they were in your story. The cowards, the spectators, the ones who valued comfort over conscience. It's a painful revelation, but it's also liberating, because their silence was never a sign of your worth. It was proof of how few are willing to stand for what's right when it costs them something. They thought staying quiet kept them innocent, but in truth, it made them part of the crime. Number 5. They didn't misunderstand you. They understood you too well. They didn't come after you because they couldn't read you. They came after you because they read you perfectly. They saw the power in you before you even knew how to use it. They noticed the quiet authority in your spirit, the way your presence commanded attention without effort. You had a light that made people look twice, and even when you were unsure of yourself, they weren't. They could sense something extraordinary growing inside you, and it scared them. They knew that once you fully stepped into your strength, they'd never be able to touch you again. So they did what fearful people always do. They attacked early. Their goal wasn't just to hurt you, it was to delay you. They wanted to plant doubt before your purpose took root. They tried to chip away at your confidence, make you question your worth, make you small enough to fit into their comfort zones. Every insult, every betrayal, every whisper behind your back was part of a silent strategy. Break you before you bloom. They couldn't stop what was destined, but they could try to slow it down. And for a while, it worked. You questioned yourself. You tried to shrink your spirit so others could feel comfortable. You apologized for existing too brightly. But what they didn't realize is that attacks like that don't kill chosen souls. They sharpen them. They studied you carefully, your habits, your emotions, your weaknesses, because they knew your greatness wasn't loud, it was steady. You were the kind of person who could walk through chaos without losing compassion, and that made you unpredictable. They couldn't control someone like you, and people fear what they can't control. So they painted you as the problem, hoping to isolate you, because isolation is how manipulators try to weaken their target. But instead of breaking, you evolved. The same experiences meant to shatter you became the training ground for your power. In truth, they weren't confused by you at all. They understood your potential more clearly than most people who claim to love you. They saw the giant forming in the shadows, and their attack was an act of panic. They didn't misunderstand your light. They understood that once it reached its full glow, their darkness wouldn't stand a chance. Number 6. Innocence is dangerous in a corrupt world. In a world where deception is a currency, innocence becomes a threat. The moment you walk into a room with a pure heart, you disturb the order of corruption that people have learned to live comfortably in. Your goodness acts like a mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that confronts. It silently reminds them that their cruelty, manipulation, and dishonesty are not survival tactics. They're habits they chose. You don't have to say a word. Your spirit does all the talking. That's why they label you naive, because it's easier to belittle your purity than to face their own moral bankruptcy. Innocence in a corrupt world is not ignorance, it's resistance. You know how twisted people can be, but you choose not to become like them. That decision alone makes you dangerous. You disrupt the rhythm of a system that runs on lies, envy, and compromise. When you stay kind in a space that rewards cruelty, you expose how hollow their rewards really are. And when you remain honest among liars, your truth becomes offensive. They start calling it arrogance or self-righteousness. Not because it is, but because your clarity makes their fog uncomfortable. The sad thing is, society teaches people to fear the pure-hearted. The world has been so conditioned to expect hidden motives that when someone's intentions are clean, it feels suspicious. People start dissecting your actions, assuming there must be something beneath the surface, because they can't imagine doing good without an agenda. They've forgotten that sincerity exists, so they turn their confusion into accusations and their guilt into gossip. But here's what they don't realize. Innocence doesn't mean weakness. It takes incredible strength to stay soft when life keeps trying to harden you. It takes wisdom to know darkness and still choose light. Those who mistake your gentleness for fragility are often the ones who crumble when the tables turn. Because when corruption meets purity, corruption always exposes itself first. Your calmness unsettles their chaos. Your peace irritates their guilt. Your simplicity unmasks their schemes. You were never naive. You were just unwilling to poison yourself to fit in. And that's the real danger of innocence in a corrupt world. It doesn't need to fight to win. It simply exists, and everything fake eventually falls apart in its presence. Number 7. They thought breaking you would erase what you represented. They didn't just want to see you fall. They wanted to make sure the world forgot you ever stood. The attack wasn't about your mistakes. It was about your meaning. You stood for something they couldn't understand. Quiet strength, unbought integrity, genuine goodness. That's what they couldn't tolerate. You weren't playing by the same rules, and that terrified them. Because if someone like you could endure the cruelty, rise above it, and still remain kind, then everything they believed about power, control, and manipulation would collapse. So, breaking you wasn't just about ending you. It was about preserving their illusion that corruption always wins. They didn't just want your silence, they wanted your surrender. They wanted to see you bitter, angry, cold, because that would mean they succeeded in converting you into one of them. It would have confirmed their lie that purity always loses. But instead, you stayed grounded. You kept your peace, even when they took everything else. You refused to match their energy, and that drove them insane. Every time you showed compassion instead of revenge, they lost a little more control. You became proof that goodness isn't weakness, it's discipline. You were living evidence that the soul can't be broken by what doesn't belong to it. Your endurance exposed their emptiness. They thought destroying you would make them powerful, but it only revealed how fragile they really were. The harder they pushed, the stronger your faith became. The more they lied, the clearer your truth stood out. They wanted you erased, but your story became louder in their attempts to silence it. You became the contradiction they couldn't cancel, a reminder that light doesn't disappear in darkness, it defines it. And now, every time they look at you, they see their failure. You were supposed to be a cautionary tale, but you became an example. They wanted to bury your name, but instead, your endurance turned you into a symbol. You're the walking proof that resilience is louder than revenge, and that grace carries more power than greed. They thought breaking you would erase what you represented, but all they did was make your message unforgettable. You didn't just survive, you exposed the lie that goodness can be destroyed. Number 8. Their cruelty was a public confession of their own misery. Their cruelty was never really about you. It was a mirror reflecting the misery they refused to confront. Every time they tried to tear you down, what they were truly doing was confessing how broken they were inside. People don't attack what they feel indifferent toward. They attack what reminds them of what they've lost, what they wish they could be, or what they know they'll never have. That's why envy often disguises itself as hostility. They couldn't stand your peace because it made their chaos obvious. They couldn't handle your integrity because it exposed their corruption. Hurting you gave them temporary relief, a short escape from the sickness of their own dissatisfaction. They told themselves stories to justify their behavior. They called it teaching you a lesson or putting you in your place. But the truth is, they were trying to quiet the voice inside them that whispered, "You'll never be like that." Every cruel word, every act of betrayal, every scheme to humiliate you, it was all part of their therapy. Pain was the only language they knew how to speak, and you, unwillingly, became their outlet. When people have no control over their own lives, they try to control someone else's peace. Their lies about you weren't random, they were symptoms. Each rumor they spread was a way to release the pressure building inside their own insecurity. The more they hated you, the more you revealed about the emptiness they carried. It wasn't confidence that drove their cruelty. It was corrosion. Their soul was rusting, and they mistook your light for arrogance because it reminded them of everything they lacked. You didn't do anything wrong. You just existed authentically, and that was enough to trigger their shame. But here's the thing about cruelty. It always tells on itself. You didn't have to defend yourself. Their behavior was the evidence. The harder they tried to break you, the clearer it became that they were already broken. Their attacks became public confessions of private misery. They thought they were exposing your flaws, but all they did was broadcast their own torment. Because the truth is simple. People at peace don't destroy others. Only the miserable mistake cruelty for power. Number 9. They didn't just break boundaries. They violated sacred space. What they did to you wasn't just a betrayal. It was a spiritual crime. They didn't just cross boundaries. They stepped into territory that was never meant for them. There are mistakes people make out of ignorance, and then there are actions people commit out of deliberate malice. And theirs was the latter. They didn't just invade your space. They trespassed into the sacred parts of your being that were meant to be protected by trust. They didn't violate your body or your reputation alone. They violated your peace, your dignity, your divine identity. That's what makes it so heavy. It wasn't merely personal, it was spiritual vandalism. When people with corrupt hearts come close to purity, something inside them snaps. Instead of honoring what's sacred, they try to desecrate it. They couldn't handle the wholeness you carried, so they tried to stain it, not because you deserved it, but because it was the only way they could live with their own emptiness. They wanted to feel powerful, so they invaded the most intimate parts of your life, trying to control what was never theirs to touch. It wasn't about curiosity or misunderstanding. It was about domination. They wanted to see if they could corrupt something that heaven itself had already sealed. And that's why the outrage runs deeper than human anger. When they came against you, they weren't just messing with flesh and blood. They were interfering with divine order. Some people forget that every soul carries spiritual authority, and when they violate it, there are consequences far beyond what the eye can see. You can't desecrate what God has sanctified and expect peace afterward. That's why so many of them are now restless, haunted, unsettled, because heaven doesn't ignore desecration. They thought they were destroying you, but they were writing evidence against themselves. They touched what was sacred, and now they carry the weight of that act in their spirit. The same energy they used to invade you has turned inward, eating away at their own peace. Because when you violate a soul that walks in truth, you don't just offend a person, you offend divine law. What they did wasn't simply cruel, it was cosmic rebellion. And the reason justice feels inevitable now is because heaven always restores what was profaned and punishes what dared to defile it. Number 10. The universe recorded everything they thought was hidden. Nothing they did went unnoticed. Not a single word, not a single act, not a single moment of cruelty slipped past the eyes of the universe. You might have felt invisible when it was happening, wondering if anyone saw the lies, the manipulation, the quiet betrayals that chipped away at your peace. But the truth is, there's no such thing as hidden in a world governed by divine order. Every action creates a record. Every injustice leaves an imprint. The universe has its own system of accountability, silent, patient, but precise. They thought they got away with it because you didn't fight back. What they didn't know was that silence isn't weakness. It's evidence being collected in higher courts. While they laughed, mocked, and boasted, the same universe they mocked was building a case. Their words became timestamps, their deceit became data, and their arrogance became evidence. Divine justice doesn't rush. It waits until the story has fully exposed itself. The delay isn't denial, it's preparation. The universe gives people just enough time to hang themselves with their own behavior. That's why some of them still look calm on the outside. They haven't yet realized they're walking inside a ticking clock. Every tear you cried, every night you felt abandoned, every time you swallowed pain instead of revenge, it all got documented. The universe doesn't just record what people do, it records why they did it. Intention is the real evidence. They may have fooled people, but they didn't fool truth itself. When divine timing activates, it doesn't just correct the wrong, it exposes the motive. That's why karma doesn't knock softly. It arrives with receipts. You didn't have to clear your name because time is already doing it for you. The same silence they mistook for defeat is now echoing as revelation. People are starting to see who was real and who was rotten. They thought they were clever, covering their tracks, but you can't hide from energy that records everything. Justice doesn't always come when we scream for it. It comes when silence has finished speaking. And when it does, it doesn't just balance the scales, it flips the entire table. Number 11. You were the test, and most of them failed miserably. You weren't sent into their lives by accident. You were the mirror they didn't know they'd be forced to look into. Your kindness wasn't just kindness, it was calibration. Your loyalty wasn't just loyalty, it was measurement. Every person who crossed your path was handed an invisible test sheet, and the questions were written in how they treated you. Would they honor goodness when it showed up with no agenda? Would they respect light when it wasn't wearing power or status? Most of them didn't even realize they were being graded until the results started showing in their own lives. You didn't test them by demanding anything. You tested them simply by existing as you are. Your authenticity exposed their deceit, your patience revealed their immaturity, and your forgiveness embarrassed their cruelty. What they called taking advantage was actually them showing their spiritual report card in real time. Every insult, every betrayal, every manipulation, those were their answers to the question of who they truly are when faced with purity. And now, the outrage surrounding them isn't random backlash, it's the echo of judgment returning from the moral universe. The beauty of divine tests is that they never announce themselves. Heaven doesn't say, "This is a chosen one, be careful." It sends you as a quiet lesson in disguise. You looked like an opportunity to use, but you were actually an opportunity to evolve. They thought hurting you would bring them control, not knowing they were writing the evidence of their own downfall. You didn't fail when they betrayed you. They failed when they couldn't recognize who you were. And now, some of them are waking up. Their peace is gone, their blessings reversed, and their conscience is restless, not because you cursed them, but because truth has finally found them. That unease they feel isn't karma's punishment yet. It's the realization that they had the chance to handle something sacred, and they broke it. You weren't just someone they mistreated, you were a divine exam, and most of them wrote their failure in permanent ink. Number 12. They tried to rewrite your character, but ended up exposing theirs. They thought they could rewrite you like a story they owned, twisting the plot to make themselves the hero and you the villain. But real character isn't edited by rumor. It's revealed by consistency. While they kept changing their version of you to fit their agenda, you kept living with quiet steadiness. And in time, that steadiness did what lies never can. It aged well. Their version of you started to rot under the weight of its own contradictions, while your truth became harder to deny. You never had to defend yourself with long speeches or public explanations. Life did the defending for you. Every time they told another lie, you simply kept being you, showing up, growing, and outlasting the gossip. That endurance became your witness, because when people lie about someone who stays the same, the lie begins to sound rehearsed. The more they tried to destroy your name, the clearer it became that they were only trying to distract from theirs. They didn't ruin your reputation. They ruined their own reflection. Their smear campaign turned into a confession of envy. They couldn't stand that you could be kind without agenda, confident without arrogance, and humble without weakness. So they called your peace fake, your silence guilt, and your progress luck. But every insult they threw became a breadcrumb trail back to their own insecurity. They wanted the world to hate you for what they hated about themselves. And now, the irony is poetic. The same mouths that tried to poison your name are choking on their own narrative. The same audience that once believed them is now watching their credibility crumble piece by piece. You didn't have to clear your name. Truth did, because real character is self-correcting over time. Lies sprint, but truth runs marathons. And while they exhausted themselves rewriting your story, you quietly wrote history, the kind that doesn't need approval, only proof. Number 13. What they called weakness was just power without arrogance. They saw your gentleness and thought it meant you could be stepped on. They looked at your calmness and assumed it was submission. But that's because they only recognize strength when it comes wrapped in noise, ego, or control. You moved differently. Your power didn't announce itself. It radiated quietly. You never needed to shout, threaten, or prove your worth. You carried it. And that silent strength intimidated people who only feel powerful when they're making others feel small. What they called weakness was actually mastery, the kind that comes from knowing you could destroy someone, but choosing not to. They mistook your self-control for fear because they don't understand that peace is a discipline. It takes more strength to stay composed when you're provoked than to explode and regret it later. They thought they were winning when you didn't react, not realizing you were simply refusing to lower your vibration to match their chaos. You weren't scared, you were sovereign. Their definition of power is rooted in insecurity. They need dominance to feel relevant. They need conflict to feel alive. But you've outgrown the need to prove anything. That's why your restraint irritated them. It revealed how reactive and fragile they truly are. You didn't fight every battle, because not every battle deserved your energy. You didn't clap back because peace was your priority, not performance. And now the tables have turned. The same people who called you weak are the ones crumbling under the weight of their own loudness. The same people who mocked your patience are now trapped in cycles of chaos they created. They mistook your humility for lack of confidence. But now they're realizing that real strength doesn't compete. It simply stands. You were never the weak one. You were the evolved one. You didn't lose because you stayed calm. You won because you stayed intact. They're just now learning that the most dangerous kind of power is the one that never needs to prove itself. Number 14. Their punishment is realizing you were the purest soul they ever touched. There's a certain kind of punishment that doesn't come from lightning bolts or public humiliation. It comes from the quiet hours when the world has gone still. That's when it hits them. That's when they remember your eyes, your patience, the way you cared without expecting anything back. They replay the moments they mocked, the chances they took advantage of, the times you extended grace they didn't deserve, and that's when the truth lands heavy. They didn't just lose a person, they lost purity in human form. You weren't naive, you were genuine. You loved without games, you helped without hidden motives, and you stayed honest when it was easier to lie. They mistook your goodness for gullibility, not realizing they were standing in front of something sacred. You weren't trying to be perfect, you were simply real in a world addicted to masks. And that realness is exactly what they tried to crush, because it made them confront what they lacked. Now the very thing they took for granted is what they crave most: peace. Not the fake kind that comes from pretending, but the kind that radiates from a clean heart. They can't buy it, can't manipulate it, can't fake it, because they already had access to it when they had you. Their punishment is remembering how effortless it felt to be around someone who genuinely meant well. Their torment is knowing they pushed away the one soul who wanted nothing but their healing. Karma won't need to destroy them, their conscience will. The mind is crueler than any external judgment when it wakes up too late. Every blessing they fumbled, every lie they told, every smear they started will echo back as regret. They'll scroll through people who look like you, sound like you, act like you, but none will be you. That's divine justice, not revenge, but realization. The kind that whispers, you had heaven's touch, and you treated it like dirt. And that awareness will haunt them longer than any punishment ever could. When the dust settles and all the lies have burned through their own fuel, what remains is truth. quiet, steady, and undefeated. Everything they tried to weaponize against you became the very evidence that revealed them. The humiliation, the betrayal, the false narratives. None of it buried you. It built your legacy. They thought destroying you would erase what you represented, but instead, it made the message louder. You were not just a target. You were a mirror that showed people what happens when purity collides with corruption and refuses to bow. You didn't lose anything that was meant for you. Every false friend, every deceitful face, every silent onlooker was exposed for exactly who they were. You walked through fire and came out refined, while they came out revealed. And that's the divine reversal, the one heaven orchestrates when innocence is mocked. Because when you have a clean soul, you don't need revenge. Your survival is the revenge. The peace you now carry is their loudest consequence. The fact that you can still love, still laugh, still rise, that's proof you were never the broken one. Now the same people who once doubted you are quietly watching your name rise from ashes they created. The same crowd that mocked your silence now studies your strength. You've become a living testimony that light doesn't lose to darkness. It just waits for the right moment to reveal how false the darkness really was. Every scar became scripture, every setback became evidence, and every tear became a seed that heaven watered in secret. So let this be your closure. You didn't survive for applause. You survived because your story wasn't meant to end in pain. It was meant to end in purpose. What they did to you was sickening, yes, but what God did through you was sacred. You turned their cruelty into clarity and their betrayal into your rebirth. And now they'll spend years trying to fix the image they shattered of themselves by attacking you. You're not just vindicated, you're immortalized in truth. If this message spoke to your soul, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your engagement helps this light reach more people walking through their own silent battles. Stay strong, stay grounded, and remember, your story isn't over. It's finally being told the right way. God bless you.